Hello everybody. So today I'm going to go through Essential Skills, Application of Number, Level 2 Controlled Task. So what I've done, I've completed a task and I'm going to give you hints and tips on how to complete a task successfully. So let's go through it. Okay, so what I will say is with these tasks, it's all about reading the question correctly and make sure you've understood it. So use a highlighter where necessary, just to remind you what you need to do. All of the resources, including the mark scheme, can be found on the WJEC website. So the scenario is you work for a company that advertises holiday cottages for rent. The owner of a new one-bedroom cottage in the Brecon Beacons wants to rent it out to holidaymakers. She wants to install a ramp onto the front step of the cottage to make it accessible for wheelchair users. So the aims of the task are to recommend a suitable weekly rent for the new cottage for low season, mid-season and high season. So I would recommend that you highlight that because that is important and sometimes it can be forgotten. This is where you lose marks. And then to work out how much a customer should pay for rent and electricity for 2 weeks stay in a cottage, and make sure make recommendations about the slope and the position of the ramp. Part 1. What you need to do, you need to read through the task and the source materials, make a plan to show how you will do this task, show your plan as a list, a table, a spider diagram or a flow chart. Now, as you can see, I have made a list. You must include the information you will use from source materials, the calculations you will do, and the reasons for your choice of at least one of your calculations. So this is in bold, it's important, it means there's marks to be gained here. And then how you will present your findings for part 2 and part 3. And then part 2 and part 3, you must show all of your calculations you do. I must stress this is very important to show your calculations, because otherwise the reader can't give you marks. If you use a calculator, make note of what you put in your calculator. Write everything down. If you use a spreadsheet, make a note of numbers and the formulas that you use. So I haven't used a spreadsheet in this control task. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible and give your answers to a suitable level of accuracy. For example, you can round up. What I would recommend with the plan is to do it as you're going along. It's a lot easier than reading the task and then thinking you'll do A, B or C, because it changes as you're going through. So do your plan as you're going along. And what I'd also recommend as well is to try and break this down into small, manageable chunks. So, for example, do it bit by bit. So you do your first bullet point and just forget about the rest because it all looks very daunting because it says it's a 5-hour task. So just break it down. And another thing I'll say is when you're writing this task, this is really important now, is to tell a story. So let the reader know, or the person who's going to mark it, the reader, let them know exactly what you're doing and why. So this will become clearer as I talk you through the task. Part 2. You need to recommend a suitable weekly rent for the new cottage for low season, mid-season and high season. First things first, you must compare the average weekly low season rent for 2 groups of local cottages. Cottages that are accessible to wheelchair users and cottages that are not accessible to wheelchair users. So let's go down to part 2. Okay. So I've started off with accessible cottages. What you need to do now is go down and find your sources. So in source 1, there are 1-bedroom cottages for rent in the Brecon Beacons. Okay, so you have to be a bit careful here because, as you can see, accessible to wheelchair users is kind of mixed up. So I've done accessible cottages first, and what I've done, I've used the mean to find the average cost. Okay, so you can see here I have put in all of my workings out, and then at the end I've given the answer rounded up, and I put my pound sign there. It's very, very important to use your pound signs, your decimal points. They're very, very important. You can handwrite these as well. It's just easier for me to show you on a computer. So what I did accessible cottages and non-accessible cottages by using the mean. So after I did that, I went back to my part 1. And then I said, I will use source 1 to find the average cost of hiring 1-bedroom wheelchair accessible and non-accessible holiday cottages. I will use the mean to find this by adding up the cottages and dividing by how many there are. So that's just letting the reader know that you know how to do the mean. Okay, so that's that bullet point sorted. Let's go back. Now what I'd recommend you do now is, because you've done this, cross it off, or if you're doing it on a computer, then just highlight it in green because you know that bit's done now. Make at least one comment on your findings. So I've said that I found the cost of accessible cottages is more than £200 a week than not accessible. Sorry, I don't know what's happened there. Than non-accessible cottages. The cost of the new cottage should be £650 for a week in low season for the new cottage. Okay, so I've made the comment. I'm going to highlight this in green because I've done it. But what I also did is go back up to my part 1, compare the results and make a comment. It's very, very important. No matter how small you think this is, you've got to write down absolutely everything. So as you can see there, it says recommend a suitable weekly low season rent for the new cottage. And I've written just that. Okay. But you when you're writing the plan, you can't just copy what the sources say. You have to use your own initiative. For example, where I've said in number 1 that I'm going to use the mean. It doesn't tell you to do that in the source. Okay. So let's go back down. And it says calculate a suitable weekly rent for the mid-season and the high season for the new cottage. So let's see where we are. So there's mid-season. So we've already said it's going to be £650 for a week. And, sorry, if we go down now, we've got to use our new source. Mid-season rent. Okay. So the mid-season and high season rent for the new cottage. So the weekly rent in mid-season is 23% more than the weekly rent in low season. So to work that out, I've just 650 divided by 100 times by 23 to find what that percentage would be, which gives us £799.50 or £800 rounded up. So you've given two figures there, both are correct. And then the weekly rent in high season is 28% more than the weekly rent in low season. So I've worked that out as well. And another thing that I haven't said is here you can see that I've done lots of subheadings, which gives the reader ideas of what you're doing, and it makes it an easier read when there's subheadings. So go back to our plan, and there we are, increase low season rent and high season rent. Okay, so let's go back up and see what it's asking us to do now. There's a lot of backing and forwarding. I would recommend, if you're going to do this, to try to print off the sources so you don't have to keep going back and forth, because it's quite awkward. Okay, so we've recommended a rent for the cottage, and we've calculated the suitable weekly rent for mid and high season because we've calculated the percentage. Okay, so the customer wants to stay in the cottage for 2 weeks between the 15th of May and 28th of May. I know now I've got to go back down to my source to see whether it's high, mid or low season. So let's go down to see what I've written. Right, so the 15th and 21st of May is mid-season, and the 21st to 28th of May is high season. So what you need to do is find out the costs, add them up, which will give you the total. And again, I've made it very clear to the reader, the cost of the rent is £1,632. Okay, again, I will add this into my plan. So we've done the rent, now we need to do the electricity. So I've gone back down to my source. Cost of the electricity is based on the monthly average temperature, so we need to find out what the temperature is now. And we can see here that the temperature is 11 degrees Celsius on average. So that means our rent is going to be £35 a week. They're staying for 2 weeks, so we've got 35 times 2 equals 70, plus our rent of £1,632, which will give us 2 weeks' rent is £1,702. So we need to put all of this in our plan and then go back. We've done this. Highlight it and turn it green. Green's a good colour for letting you know that things are done. And look at our list now, it's looking substantially smaller. So we've got to present our findings in a suitable way. Complex table, diagram, line graph, a bar chart, pie chart. It really doesn't matter as long as you can fit them all in. I've done a really, really brief chart there, but I've put in the cost of the new cost of the cottage, mean cost of a non-accessible cottage, and a mean cost of an accessible cottage. So what you need to do there is to make sure, I haven't put a title in there, but you need to make sure there's a title in there, and down the side as well, it needs to state that that is in pounds. Otherwise, you're going to lose marks. For the chart, you can gain 3 marks, I believe. If you go to the mark scheme with the WJEC, it will tell you exactly how many marks, where and when you can gain them as well, which is quite helpful. So I have presented my findings. I'm going to turn that green, and we're already on to part 3. So the owner of a new cottage wants to install a concrete ramp for the front step of the cottage. You need to make recommendations about the slope and the position of the ramp. You must calculate the ratio of the slope and the proposed ramp. So let's go down. So Let's have a look at our sources. So to find the ratio of the ramp, you divide the length 1500 millimeters by the height 140 millimeters, which will give us the answer, and then you round that up, which would be 1 to 11. Okay, so we've found the ratio of the ramp. Sorry everybody, there's a lot of backing and forthing with these tasks. Let's turn in green. Okay, do a calculation to decide how to change the proposed ramp so it meets regulations. Now, how are we going to know what regulations are? Let's see if it says on our source. This is where sometimes it gets confusing. Right, there are notes here. Okay, the slope of the ramp is the ratio of the height and length. To meet the safety regulations, the slope must have a ratio between 1 to 12 and 1 to 20. So the length of the ramp should be you times the height by the ratio. So it's 140 times by 12. I'll give you 1680 millimeters. And then I've written in brackets to help you, this meets safety regulations. Refer to the diagram. So sometimes there's information in there that is easily missed. That is a very important bit. Okay, so let's go and turn that one green. Okay, calculate the volume of concrete needed to make the ramp. This is everyone's favourite now. What I will say is you have got to use bid mass. Refer to that, otherwise it's so easy to go wrong. And I always call these these formulas, they're like jigsaw puzzles. It's down to us to unravel them. So source 8, how to find the volume of the prism. So as you can see, I've copied the first bit. And then secondly, I've gone underneath and I've decided to find out where the times are. So wherever there's a letter, remember there's a times, length times width times height. And remember that line is divided by 2. So using bid mass, I got the length, the width and the height times them, and then divided by 2, which gave us our answer, which was rounded up here. So if you check out my other YouTube videos, there are other tutorials which will help you with different maths. But by the time you come to these tasks, you should be able to do all of them. Okay, so we've got the volume. Make at least 2 comments. So here are the 2 comments. Okay. I've said that the ramp is too long to go into the space next to the bedroom, so it needs to be built next to the living room wall, where there will be enough space for the full length. Let's have a look at the diagram, and you can see why I've said that. Okay, because otherwise the ramp's going to come out too far. Okay, let's go back up. So we've done the 2 comments. Turn them green, and it says to present your findings in a suitable way. I have done a very, very, very brief table there. It needs to be more in depth than that, but it's just to give you an idea of something that you could use and input all of your findings into. So this is just a very, very brief idea. As I said, if you look into the WJEC website, they've got resources there and mark schemes, and they give you examples of tables that are accepted and graphs that are accepted, pie charts, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my part one. Excuse me, this is the story. So I will use source one to find out the average cost. I will compare results and make a comment, recommend a low season rent for a new cottage, increase by 23% for mid-season and 28% for high season, find the correct season dates for the customer stay, source 3. So I have mentioned the sources that we've used. Find the average temperature for May. And then I've gone on to make sure that people know it's part 3. So I've told a story of what I plan to do. But as I said, I've done it as we're going along because it's easier that way. Because, you know, when you write it first, sometimes these tasks can seem very daunting and quite hard to get it all down to a plan. Okay, anyway, that's me all done. Have a look at my other YouTube videos to see if they can help you in any way, and hopefully next up I am going to show you how to complete a confirmatory test. That is non-calculator. Thanks for listening.